Hi guys, so today we're doing a picture of a stingray half under the water. So the first thing I'm going to do is apply a load of water to my sky because I want to pad out my clouds, so I need it to be very wet. And then what I'm going to do is mix up a colour using the turquoise and the ultramarine. I'm going to make it mainly ultramarine, but add a little bit of turquoise just to give it that vibrancy. I want it to be a very different colour to the actual sea, so that's why I'm going to use mainly that ultramarine kind of purpley blue, but I don't want it to be very purpley, so I am actually adding a little bit of that colour. And I'm going to deposit a load of colour on there and then start sucking it up. So what I'll do is dry my brush with the kitchen towel and I'll start sucking that colour out a little bit as well. So this whole sky section is going to be a mix back and forth until I'm happy with it. Leaving it really wet to begin with will help you be able to do this and have enough time without having watermarks or whatever in it. And I'm just playing around, adding a bit of colour, taking away colour, and basically doing what I want with it until I'm happy. So once I'm happy with the colours I've got on there, I'm actually going to pad my clouds out. So if you just wait until I'm finished with the colours. Also, you may notice that I do drag my brush across those kind of trays when I'm using this colour. That's to take off some of the paint so I haven't got quite so much on there. That's a good technique if you're using a big wash brush like this. So at this point I'm quite happy with how the colour's going. You can see the still sucking out and depositing where I want it. And at this point I am going to start padding my clouds out. So I'm just adding a little bit extra of that dark blue colour. And then I'm going to start padding my clouds out. So when you are padding your clouds out, when you are using a very wet wash like this, you'll find that the paint will still run back into those areas where there's has been paint. So because it's wet, they kind of suck back in and you lose some of your clouds, so you will have to go back and forth over it a couple of times. Also, a good thing to remember is if you have any little spots that you don't like, if the sky's uneven anywhere, pop a cloud in there. There's no reason you can't put a cloud somewhere different. They're clouds, they go wherever. So remember that as you're doing it. Okay, so the next stage I'm going to get my mountains in the background, and I'm going to make a blue and a brown together to make a greyish colour, but I'm going to make it pop a little bit towards blue. Now I am going to add some colours in here to make this a little bit interesting just because it's far in the distance. So obviously I want it to have some interest, but it's not going to be my focal point. So what I'm going to do is start making my mountains, and I'm making sure that the top line of them is the neatest part. So I'm going to go over bits of the sky that I'm unhappy with, and then I'm going to drag that colour around. So I'm adding the colour to get my nice peaks, and then I'm going to wash it out with a bunch of water to keep it really wet because I really want to play with it and put some weird shapes and stuff in there. So keeping it all nice and wet. The top section is where I want most of my colour, so I'm just going to drag that across and make the rest of my mountains. Also at this point, if you do go over the blue and you can see it through your grey, remember that you can kind of scrub it out a little bit using your brush. If you kind of go back and forth a little bit, as long as you don't rub too hard and destroy the paper, you can actually just kind of get rid of that bluish colour beneath. We'll be doing this later when we put in our stingray as well. So making sure it all stays wet. You can see how I'm doing the next bit, but I'm always going back and adding a little bit of water to keep that first bit damp because I want this whole section to be done in kind of one go. So I'm following the shape of my waves as well across the bottom because my wave goes up and down. You possibly can't see the pencil drawing beneath. So I'm just tweaking about with it, and I'm not really overly worried about using it too wet whilst it's in a drying paint because I kind of want those effects anyway. And I'm going to make my ground go to about this point, but then what I do want is to have a little bit of ground at the end as well. So I'm going to wash all that out. And you could just leave it at this stage if you wanted. I just come in and play with it with a few other colours. So I'm just tweaking that wave line. And this is really important to get that wave line in. The top and bottom of this is really important because obviously the wave line is going to be lighter than this grey. So now I'm just going to start depositing little bits of colour, and it's still wet at this stage, but it's kind of damp rather than soaking wet, so it's obviously giving it a kind of interesting weird effect where it's splaying out but not mixing. So if you find any of your paper has dried too much, you know you can always bring in some water and let that splay out a little bit more. This far left I think is a little drier, so I may come in with just some plain water to move that about a bit. And this will just give you a really interesting kind of shape in the background, like a weird kind of effect on your rocks without actually having to do much by just depositing those little bits of paint in there. It'll give you kind of weird cauliflowers and squiggles. So I'm just finishing off the ground over to the right hand side. I'm adding some colour in there. I may add some more colour into this later. You could always do a couple of washes if you weren't happy with how the first one turns out. But really we're just kind of mucking about with it and giving us an interesting looking kind of background there, but without making it too much of a focus point, because obviously our focus is going to be on the water. Also nice colours to put in this background if you wanted to. You could put like a purpley colour in that would look really beautiful as well, or very pinky colours. It would just be your own personal preference with that point. So then we're going to leave this to dry and work on our next stage, which will be the surface of the water. Okay, so that's all dry, and what I'm doing is coming in with some wax to keep some sections white. I'm not using masking fluid because I don't want it to be any other colour, so I'm just coming in with wax, and also I really like the effect of the wax. So this whole lesson is really going to be about using cling film in watercolour. We've never done that before, so this would be quite an interesting way of showing you how it would really work well in a picture. So what we're going to do is make up 3 colours. I'm going to use my ultramarine blue, I'm going to use my turquoise, and then I'm going to make a turquoise that's a little bit more vibrant by adding a bit of yellow. And I'm going to wetten these so they're ready to work with. So I'm just going to add some turquoise to this yellow. However, I'm going to use more turquoise than yellow. I don't want it to be green, I still want it to be turquoise. So I don't want it to be right in the middle of the two. I want it to be popping more towards blue. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet this whole surface area, so just the top of the water. I'm going to use that as a separate entity to the bottom because I really want that focus point to be that we're looking halfway under the water. So we need the surface of the water slightly lighter and different to the base. So what I'm doing is wetting it to give myself a little bit more time to play around with it. And then I'm going to go ahead and start adding my colours. So that turquoise I started with because I thought that was the best colour I had, and I really wanted to have a lot of that in there. You can see where it's not going on top of the wax there, where the wax resist is coming in. Now you don't have to use cling film in your one, you could just do the whole thing like this with kind of a little bit of wax resist. That would work perfectly well. It's just that we've never done wax resist before, we've never done cling film before, and I really wanted you guys to see how lovely it is. As you can see there, that was a little dry, so just come in and wash it out. It doesn't really matter at this point if it's kind of weird and all over the place, because kind of look we're going for anyway. All you really need to do if you're going to do the cling film effect is make sure it's really wet. It's the same as when we do the salt effect, the wetter the better. Really does work nicely if the paper is nice and wet with the water. So once I've got my colours where I like them, I am then going to come in with the cling film. So I'm just making sure I'm getting that surface. I know that the base level, the base level of water underneath is going to be darker, so I can neaten that lower line up then, but I'm still trying to follow it a bit. You might as well try and keep it as neat as you can. And I'm working with the smaller brush now rather than that big wash brush anyway, so also, as you can see, you've got the wax resist in there, but also I really want some dark pops and some light pops, so this is where I'm just darkening some areas because obviously it was quite pale and I want it to be paler than the base level of the water, but I still want it to have some darker areas. So now I'm going to come in with my cling film and I'm going to apply it. I think I applied it in 2 pieces. You could do just one huge piece, it's just that my cling film just happened to come off in 2 pieces. So I'm going to apply that on to the wet paint, and then you have got some element of moving it around and playing with it. So move it around and make sure you like how it goes and the patterns it's getting. Obviously when you're working with that right hand side going up towards the clouds, you've got to be careful not to push the turquoisey colour into your sky, because obviously that would be quite difficult to correct later. I mean, with the rocks and the grey it's not so difficult, you can rub it out a little bit, but definitely with that right hand side going into that bluish sky, you really don't want to have a big splodge of turquoise splashing up there, so be careful with it to a point. So now I'm just doing the exact same process but filling in the entire base area. This is really good to see how I do a large area around a small item. What I'm doing is using my small brush to go around the item, and I'm still not overly worried about going into it a bit because obviously most of it is black, but it's definitely around that front bit where it's light. I'm using my smaller brush and then I'm washing out every time I get to a point where I'm going to move on to the next section. I'm still wetting and washing out the other sections so that they don't dry with a horrible shape in them. So you can see me applying the colour and then using the big wash brush to keep wetting that base layer so that it doesn't have that horrible drying part. So you're just going to push the colour around. Now it doesn't have to be an even wash. I want to change the colours. I want there to be darks and lights because obviously I'm going to do the cling film again in this part, so I'm kind of pushing it around, deciding where I want the colour and where I don't. I wanted this to go dark at the top to lighter at the bottom and then into a kind of sandy colour, which I've made up at the top right there, you can see, which is yellow ochre with pink and brown mixed in. But I'm going to use that very, very, very pale, so I'm going to use that with the wash brush in a minute. So once I'm happy with the dark blue of the sea, I'm going to wash in that other colour at the base. So again, you can see I went over a little bit of his tail there, but I didn't really mind about that because I know that part of him it's black. Now I'm bringing in that colour there, and you can see how I'm taking a little bit of the green in with it, but that doesn't really matter, it all just adds to it. And again, I'm going to put the cling film on and I'm going to rearrange it. Now you can see some of the colours gone into my little ray there, but that doesn't really matter because that part of him's black. I did use a little bit of masking fluid just around the front of his face where I knew it was white, so that it wouldn't get into that point. So now I'm going to make up the colour of my ray. I've taken all the masking fluid off around the front of him where he's white, and I'm going to make that really dark colour up. You can see me removing that masking fluid just around his face, and that was just in case when I did squidge it all up it went over him, which it did on his kind of wing, would you call that. Did go over him a little bit, but obviously not that much over his face anyway, so I could have done without that, but just in case I did put a little bit of masking fluid there. I'm going to make up this dark colour, and I'm going to do this very similar kind of echo in the mountains, so I'm going to use that kind of greyish blacky colour, but I'm going to tip it both ways. I'm going to put little different colours in it as I'm going along. So I'm going to do little bits of that colour that's more blue and little bits of that colour that's more brown. And you will see as I'm doing this that I will swap out my brush and start using the thinner brush when I'm getting to certain points. So what I'm doing is doing the dark area at the top and trying to get that real dark, lovely bit where his kind of fin disappears underneath the wave, and then I'm going to add a bunch of water where he goes lighter there, and I'm going to play in that a bit later, but at the moment I'm just trying to get all that dark in, but that little light bit I can add some dark to in a minute, so it gives me a little bit of time to play around with it. So as you can see, the front of my ray also is a really kind of horrible shape. I didn't really work around him brilliantly, as you can't when you're trying to do such a large area quite quickly. So I have actually left kind of a weird squiggly shape around the front of him, which is where his little kind of mouth bits come down, but also it's going to be fixed in a minute when I get some turquoise paint, but I'm going to do this area first. So I'm going to get the shape of his wing in. So I'm just painting all that dark in. And now I am actually going to start doing little kind of pointillism on him, like I'm going to do little kind of dots all over him, because that really adds to that kind of pattern that they have on them anyway. And get that shape of his mouth in. And you're kind of ignoring that front section, so paint him where you want him to be. Don't think, oh, he has to feel that white. Paint him where you want him to be, and then you can bring that turquoise and blue in later to kind of sort that area out. That middle section is still really nice and wet, so I can work that paint into that. So now I'm going to work on that light section. I'm going to kind of divide that up and make it look a bit more like he looks in that picture. So you can see I'm starting to dot. It's still very wet at this point. I'm going to start dotting in that colour and separating it out. He has two kind of large lighter areas on the top of him. I've changed my brush over, so I'm using the tiny brush now. And I want it to be pale, but I don't want it to just be a big awful kind of big splodge like that. I want to kind of start merging it in a bit so that it's a paler area, but it is also looks like it's part of his skin. So I don't know if you can really tell on this picture, on this video, but I have got kind of two slightly different colours mixed up there. I've got much more of a bluey version of that colour and a much more browny version, and I do keep popping it one way or the other just to give myself a little bit of interest. So you can tweak his shape with the small brush because you've got a little bit more control over it now. So now I think I'm just enhancing those colours and making them a bit darker so that I can work with them again. So mainly I'm just using the brown and the blue, but I think I might actually be making up some colours now to put in the base layer where the sand is, because I'm going to put those rocks in. And I'm going to use the cling film effect on this as well, so I'm going to make it really nice and watery. So I think at this point I was just getting the cling film ready. So what I'm going to do is apply some water where the rocks are, and then I'm going to put some of that. I think I made two colours up. One was the blue and the brown, the ultramarine and the burnt umber, and then another one was the same, the blue and the brown, but with yellow ochre mixed in as well to give it a slightly different tone. And I'm going to mix them in, and I really want just an effect of those rocks. I don't want them to be actual outlined rocks, so I'm definitely going to make it washy and wash them all out. And again, you know, you're following it to a point, you don't have to have it be exact. I think at this point I really wanted it to be a much more bluey colour in there as well, just to make it very different. Yeah, so I had a lot darker area. So you can see how I'm going to put in the rocks and then wash them out again. And as you can see, because my water's getting dirty, you can see a watermark down the bottom of that rock. So what I am going to do is grab some kitchen roll and dab that out so that you don't get that horrible watermark there. So remember to do this bit before you put your cling film on, just to soften the edges out, because I do want it to be more of an idea. And then I'm going to chuck that on and arrange it. And that's exactly how I'm going to do the other two rock formations. Well, there's actually only one rock formation at the bottom, but also I put one to the right because it just balanced that picture out, I felt. Because there is a dark element there anyway, but I didn't want to go over that lovely part of the sea to the right, so instead I put a rock there. And again, I'm breaking up that kind of shape with water around the edges. You definitely need to be using clean water, because me using dirty water meant that I had to dab it out around the edges because it was dirty. So don't do as I am doing, do as I say instead. So I'm dabbing around the edge just to neaten it up, and then I'm going to put the cling film on it again. And then I'm going to do my last one over to the right, just because I felt like that area was missing something. I think it's because my kind of ground that I made a nice colour, but I feel like it was a bit too pale, but I really liked how it washed into the top one. I really liked how the blue and the kind of yellowy colour did that weird bit, especially down to the right hand side of it where it joins. I really enjoyed that part of it, so I really didn't want to put another wash of that kind of yellow colour on there, but I felt like the ground was really missing something down there to the right, and I didn't really want to put that dark area in and ruin all that lovely shapes I'd made, so I just put a rock there instead. But that's the thing with doing painting, so you can just kind of mix it up as you're going. So I'm just making sure that that cling film is away from my little stingray, or whatever he is. I don't know if he's a stingray. And now, whilst he's still a little bit kind of drying, I am just applying more colour. You can see I went over that bit a bit too much, so I padded that out because I did get rid of some of that light which I was enjoying, so I took that out again. But I am kind of adding some different colours in now, putting some of that colour echoing what's in the base, and I think that's really nice when you do that when you're doing a painting. If you kind of echo the colours of the mountains into him and into the base, into those rocks, it's quite nice to have all the different colours in there. So I'm just dabbing on different colours just to give him a bit more interest, because he's at the drying stage now anyway, so a lot of him was dry, so I was able to kind of put some colour in where I wanted it. and tweak him a little bit. Okay, so now he is dry and the rocks are dry and I've taken off the cling film, and now I'm going to make up some turquoise and try and fix his shape a little bit. So where he has that kind of bit going around his mouth at the front, that definitely needs fixing, all that lighter area. So I'm going to sort that out by putting the colour in. And you remember how I've told you in class before, where you put the colour in but then you can actually like wash it out so it doesn't look like it's a different colour to the background. You put the colour in and then wash that kind of outline away so that it doesn't look like you've just drawn a line around him in a blue. You can kind of wash it into that background with clean water. So put your colours in and then wash it around. The nice thing about this is that we have kind of weird patterns going on anyway, so we can kind of wash it into them a bit. I'm going to correct that shape of his mouth as well, so it comes up a lot higher and it's like a little bit kind of squared out around the base of his mouth there, so I'm going to fix that with that blue and then wash it out with water so that it doesn't look different to the rest of the painting. And then that last bit is that base bit with the white. And I think I tried this with the turquoise, but it's definitely going into ultramarine blue along that base, so I think it did look completely different coloured. So I think I grabbed some of that ultramarine blue, yeah, just because that definitely isn't the right blue that I need to wash it into. So I'm just going to use a little bit of that and push that in and get the actual shape of his base, his body there. So I don't know if you can actually see in the photo that he has that little kind of white base bit. It is a little bit blue, which I do add in a minute anyway, but at this point I've just got it brilliant white so you can really see it. And I'm washing that out with water again. So now I am making the blue of his little bit of his white body. And I'm going to start putting in light bits of where it is. He has got a little bits of blue in there. So he has a brilliant white kind of bit around the edge of his mouth, and then a ring going in his mouth, brilliant white. And then the rest of him is kind of very pale blue. So I was just leaving that brilliant white around the edge and bringing in that pale blue and across his base as well, because he's just reflecting the water. And that's where his gills are. So I'm just washing out anywhere where I feel like it hasn't dried very nicely around him. I think I was making up a deep colour for his eyes now, so I had to pick up the picture because I really couldn't see where his eyes were. And then I put them on where I think they are, but also noticed that he has very white area around his eyes, so I grabbed my white gel pen and I started putting on any little areas that were really brilliant white, that were really tiny, maybe too tiny to grab with the masking fluid, so I'm now putting them in with the white gel pen. So his eyes definitely, and then he had a few little areas where he kind of had little dots of light on him, so I put them in. which were on his dark body, and I also continued that base of his across under his wing because I felt that that looked really beautiful to extend that out, even though I don't think it really was much in that picture, but it just kind of added to it. So remember, when it's your picture, you can take it to the level you want to. Now here's a tip with using gel pen. If you put on a light source and you think it's too bright, you can actually kind of subdue it a bit by touching it. I'll do that in a minute, you'll see. So I added some white gel pen to the top up here. You can barely see it on the video, but in the actual picture you can see it. And then I started putting some bubbles in the water, which again you possibly can barely see, but it just added a nice little something to it. And it gave you more that effect that that bit was underwater. So I did start adding some white to him now, which I do touch out. So all you do is add the ink, and then when you want it to be a little less vibrant, you just pat it with your finger like this, and all that does is take it off a little bit. And now I'm just taking off the tape. So I would say that was the finished piece. I thought that was the finished piece, but then I realised I hadn't done the inside of his mouth properly, so I do come back to it in a second. So all I needed to do was darken that inside area in his mouth. And to get in his gills, because you can see his like gills from the inside going out. So again, if you wanted to get this area with a pen, a fine liner or something, because you have a little bit more control, that's fine. I'm just using up the leftover dark paint that I had. And once they are in, that is our finished picture of our little ray, half in the water, half out of the water. So we get that kind of effect of a photo taken halfway in the ocean, which I thought was quite an interesting challenge and was a really good one to play around with that cling film effect. So I think I used a little bit of blue just to pop out that base bit of his mouth. And that's him, he's finished. I'm just using that blue to give him some speckles on his white, so that it gives him more of the same kind of texture that he had on his grey body. with the little spots. And he's all done. I hope you enjoyed that, guys. I'll speak to you soon.